Recording is on.
All right, today is October 17th, 2021, and we're going to continue our discussion on the Extinctionati Western Desiderata meeting, and we'll do a roll call again of our contacts. So with Derek Jensen, Heather's been trying to get him, but it's been tough. So I think she says she has some dates in November, so I'll get back to you on that. But other than that, that's it for me.
Yeah, I haven't got much to report. So Gary wanted me to invite Lionel to these meetings, so I did, but he said it's not really kind of much of a joiner. So I don't know, he might, but I'm not really expecting him to. And he's had a little trouble with internet from South Africa.
I want to stop you, Hugh, because Lionel actually came an hour earlier. Lionel came. I told him the meeting won't start for another hour. He said he couldn't make it then, but he tried earlier. Yeah, I was surprised to see him.
Ah, damn! It's the time zones again.
Right.
That's good. Yeah. Also, okay, so maybe he'll come next time, if he knows. I'll remind him again. In terms of the IB stuff, I've just been waiting to see, what happened. Now they're on pause, and yeah. I saw that on Monday, the UK Minister of Finance is going to announce, their targets for COP26 they're going to try and meet them by nuclearization. So that's going to be their prime policy. But I saw buried in there, they said something about infrastructure bill that sounded like it might be a concession to, roundabout backhand way to IB, which, would be amazing result if they did actually concede to the demand. So anyway, that landscape will change and stuff. So the involvement actually doing the, particularly the ARG stuff is not on fire like I thought it would be. It was, it's more like wait and see how this results. I still think it's kind of a dead end strategy because, it's like where'd you go with this if you, even if you took over the government in the wildest sense, I can't really see what the government is supposed to do about the climate crisis and things like that. So, I can see the point in having a revolution because things are about to get very authoritarian. But, as we were talking about in the meeting this morning, is making these huge grandstanding stands. I don't know, man. I think, it's, the immune system of the you're not evading the immune system. The immune system is going to gobble you up this way. So even if it works in Britain, it's not really exportable. So it seems a bit short-sighted. But anyway, we just have to see how that unfolds and then take it from there.
May I just say that I think I sent you an email from Paul Kingsnorth, and he's happy to talk to us. He said he'd rather be unrecorded, but I mean, I suggested what you said, Hugh. I told him we could do an unrecorded first, and we could do another one if he likes if it goes well. So I'm waiting for him to get back to me for some dates. So I'll let you know when that's happening. Otherwise, I have no news from the UK, from any probation officers yet. I was Paul Kingsnorth. This morning we talked about a lot of things: AI, intelligence, reading, words, writing, and because we're inviting Paul Kingsnorth, I don't know if you can see this book that I have of him that was published in 2019, Savage Gods. And it's a book where he starts to have a crisis of belief in words, and he's a writer. So I think it's a good. I'd be happy to. I've read it, but I could look at it again before we meet with Paul, because maybe we could start on a subject that he has written on recently, and it might be more interesting because his crisis of faith. I honestly don't think it would be a good topic to.
Well, he can't avoid it. He can't avoid it because a crisis of words is a crisis of faith. It says in the New Testament, John's Gospel, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So if you're having a crisis with words, you're having a crisis with God. So that's the Logos. I don't.
But this morning,
I haven't got very mystical yet. But in the morning meetings talking about AI, I haven't got very woo-woo yet. But it is extremely woo-woo, exactly what AI is.
This morning, during the meeting, I posted a little comment on the side that was the introduction of James C. Scott of Against the Grain. And you mentioned him actually during the meeting, but it's a introduction by a French anthropologist that I like very much. His name is Claude Lévi-Strauss. He did a lot of very interesting works in anthropology. And he says, writing appears to be necessary for the centralized, stratified state to reproduce itself. Writing is a strange thing, the one phenomenon which has invariably accompanied the formation of cities and empires, the integration into a political space, that is to say, of a considerable number of individuals into a hierarchy of castes and classes. It seems to favor rather the exploitation than the enlightenment of mankind. And this from a writer too. And
well, yeah, I mean, writing was weaponized right from the start. If you have a look at the very first contracts on cuneiform tablets, they bonding people. You see, it's an infallible witness. A piece of clay is an infallible witness. So they're trying to say, the very first instances of writing in cuneiform, they're saying things like they can't interpret the whole thing, but it's pretty obvious once you know that it's a contract. It's saying that like Mahmet or whatever his name is, Mehmet or something, is the very first name we've ever seen. The very first individual that's ever been named is on this one cuneiform tablet, the oldest one we know. And that nobody has a name before that. If in all the cave paintings and everything, there's no signature of an artist except maybe the handprints. One guy has a broken finger in the Shovi caves, and you can see he's one of the major artists. But apart from that, there are no signatures. There's no identifiers of individuals. And then the very first identifier of an individual is this guy like Mehmet, and he's named in the thing in phonetics, and then it's clear what they're saying, that Mehmet has to deliver like 40 bushels of grain at the place and the time. So it's this festival in Samaria, in like Nippur. And so you see the essence of what writing is. It names an individual, right? Basically tattoos them, and does a bit of biometrics on them. And it bounds them so that they can't deny that the contract was ever made, which is the problem with verbal agreements is they're deniable. And so there you have it. It's bondage. It's putting somebody in bondage, and that's what writing is for.
Yeah, it's funny with the Native Americans being afraid of having a photo taken of them stealing their soul and that kind of thing. But if you are having a notepad in front of you and someone's taking notes when you're speaking, you become very careful about what you say, because you know that can be used as a threat, as a weapon against you later. It's you need to be deliberate, because that you can't just wave it off as we're humans talking. It's you have future power against me with that notebook.
Well, that's how it goes in a court case. Stenographer, and what the prosecution does is try and thwart your memory. So it's basically dehumanizing you and giving themselves superpowers, because the prosecution attorney will go back. The prosecution is adversarial. And then if you understand, they will try and catch you out, and catch you out in terms of your memory. So they say, well, according to the deposition, and the stenographer said, your words were, and they read your words back from your past. So what they're doing is they're getting your past self to confound your current self to your detriment. Now, the state never has that. Apart from maybe historians and stuff writing, shit posting about the state. Maybe journalism could be considered stuff like that. But in general, the state and the landlord, they don't really have that kind of jeopardy. They don't really run that kind of jeopardy of the record, because they set up the record. In commercial law is mainly about breach of contract, and so they set up the contract, and so it's kind of you're in double jeopardy, because they bound you once, and now by having a court case, they're going to trip you up and bind you again by what you say in the short term. So it's a vicious system. But that's what its purpose was. Everybody thinks it's for literature and doing Mary Shelley and Shakespeare. No, it was to bind people, and that's the way it is. But the vast majority of ink spilt on paper today, I mean, this Sunday, will have been commercial contracts bounding, things like bonds, financial instruments. They're called bonds for a reason, because they bind people. So it's fundamentally a violent, coercive system, and writing is at the heart of it. It was always weaponized. That's why the scribes were, vetted. They didn't let anybody become a scribe. You had to basically be pro the system.
Right. That's the currency that you can redeem for state violence, for the monopoly on violence. Is if you have enough records on someone, that's how you can redeem it for violence against your neighbor.
Yeah, as long as you have enough laws, then you can make everybody a transgressor. And then that gives you the power, because you have the power to prosecute them or not. So you can elect to prosecute some people and not others. And then that's the definition, the very definition of power. So we see today the super rich get away with anything, and they use their monopoly power on the courts and their money to arm wrestle the little people. So it's the very definition of power.
Well, I wouldn't say the super rich get away with everything. Like Angela Merkel had her phone tapped and everything. Like, it doesn't matter how powerful you are still being eaten by the state, or by the system. I mean, not by the state.
Yeah, but I mean, how much jeopardy is Bill Gates in from all of this? I think he runs increasingly this supranational bunch of these very rich guys that really the nation's serving them, and it's convenient for them, but they're not held to account.
To some degree. I mean, they don't need passports necessarily. For if you've got a private jet, the airports will let you land without checking you in security and that kind of thing. Like, there's like a separate set of rules for those people. But at the same time, it's only as it please the court, right? It's only as it as long as you're supporting the ruling powers, you get those perks. It's just like like you've said before, the capo system. Like, you get special perks for being the ones that help prop the system up.
Yeah, what's amazed me over my career is how quickly or how low the bar is, where it kicks in, and it's almost like an officer class. But there's a definite class boundary where everything suddenly, all the rules are waived, and you suddenly get a free pass, and nothing that applies to the average person applies to you. And it happened to me, but I mean, I only had a couple of million in the bank, and then that was enough to pass you over that threshold. Everything goes from being a red light to, like, this royal highway. Everything opens up for you, and everything in terms of flights, and you don't, like you say, they don't do passports. They don't, like Bill Gates and these guys, they're not going to be showing QR codes to go into the venues they go to. It just doesn't work that way. So the rules are for you. It's not, continually liberals, I think, tend to think, that, we're all in this together, we're all equal, and they all apply to us. And then they ooh and ah when they find out that, some of these guys did a transgression. But it's like the world doesn't, they're not under the same law that we're under.
Yeah, the rule of law is an illusion. It only is a story that we tell everybody to think that it's equally applied, so that we don't get upset about it being unequally applied. But it's absolutely, countries break their own laws as a matter of course. When it comes to, we're just going to blame we need to make sure that we can break our own laws so that we can find the few pedophiles among us or something. But then they use it for political will, or they use it for encroachment on industrial espionage and that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, this is a hugely important point, because I don't think a lot of people know that the bottom of the social structure, what maybe nice people would call the criminal classes, they don't obey the law. They're not subject to the law. They're doing their own shit. And then the very top, they're doing their own shit. So it's only the masses of the bourgeois, and they kind of like the sheep that everybody is feeding off. So the law applies to the middle classes, and they scrupulously attentive to obeying the law. But the rich and the poor don't obey the law. They go their own way. The rich, and they kind of have mutual respect for each other. But I'll give you an example in case you think I'm being a bit too hyperbolic. But I once had to do a bit of software for, there was a kind of an AI thing for finding which tickets, airline tickets, were actually fraudulent. And I find, because I've been doing this work, I find out, and was shared these, airlines, they shared information that there's masses of tickets. I mean, it's something like 30% of all flights, tickets sold, are done fraudulently. In other words, they're not the actual person. They're somebody flying under an assumed name because they're a criminal, or they've done with a stolen credit card and stuff. So it's really 70%. The airlines are very keen that you don't know this. And the reason is because they expose that 7% of the people are so profitable, they cover the crooks, the 30% crooks that are flying next to you on the plane. And so basically it's thieves stealing from thieves, and they kind of have this mutual respect. So the airlines kind of respect all these guys that are doing, flying under the radar, sorry, literally. They don't prosecute them too hard. They try and identify them, but they know full well, as if it becomes public knowledge, they're just as crooked as the crooks. So they go. And the same applies to credit cards. Credit cards defaults and credit card crime, identity theft is absolutely epidemic all over the world. But the banks as well, the retail credit card holders, and they don't credit lenders. They don't want the public to know that, because the scam is that all the predatory pricing and usury that they're doing for credit card debt is such a ripoff. It's basically a payday loan scheme. And so the fact that like 50% of card transactions are bogus, they like, shh, don't let everybody know that. Otherwise, the 50% that we're all milking. So you're having the very poor guys doing identity theft and stealing all these people's wealth. And it's kind of, then you have the big guys doing the same. And they both have this kind of gentleman's agreement amongst thieves that we don't upset the apple cart. So
yeah, now that you brought it up, I think we should have a little public service announcement. The bag tags that you have on your luggage, and as well as pictures of your tickets and things like that you post on Instagram or whatever, those can get all your personal information. There's a lot of really easy scans that can be done on that. And the system that you're talking about, one of the major ones is called Sabre, which does the reservations for airlines and things like that.
That's what I was working on was Sabre. I didn't want to say it because
well, you didn't have to say it. I'll say it. That system is pre-internet. So it had to, when you think about it, it had to be a global network of to coordinate, delayed flights and that kind of thing. And so this is way old stuff on mainframes that is just, it's too expensive to fix, and it is woefully insecure. It is just a joke. And that they're unable to fix it because the system's working. And it would cost, billions of dollars to fix. So we just live with the insecurity. And that's just kind of a theme of the entire technical system, is that it's all fundamentally insecure and dangerous.
But just let me highlight that is, do you know who the amount of, everybody thinks, the credit card theft is somebody that sits next to you on the plane, and when you fall asleep, they steal your bag and take it to the toilets and like take photographs of your credit cards. No, the vast majority are the guys in call centers and guys at EPOS stations and stuff, and they're asking your details. They're saying, what's the security code on the back of your credit card? Give me this and give me that. And what do you think they're going to do? They're paid minimum wage. They're going to go and fucking sell it on the dark web, for Christ's sake. What else would they do? And so the vast majority of these things, so for example, like on Sabre, since you mentioned it, is, if you're bored and you're a flight attendant or some checkout thing in some place, Lagos, the amount of shit that you can find on anybody just by typing in a passenger, and then the very thing that I was working on was anti-fraud thing. They tie up with so much other information that anybody working on those systems effectively has the eyes of God. That's the important part of AI too, is everybody thinks, well, the government is looking at, no, the government is individual people like cops. And, these are the cops who just we've just seen a rash of them, basically being serial killers. And the way they get away with it is because they know the system and they're inside. But imagine how much power an average cop has. That, like, you're a next door neighbor to a cop, and he doesn't like your dog barking or something like that. You know what shit he can do to you? He can fucking ruin your life. And it's basically, he has the power of the state. And so the possibility for abuse and theft, identity theft, and it's just extreme. And all these liberals think, well, it's keeping me safe. I don't have anything to hide, so therefore I don't have anything to worry about. Are you fucking kidding? You've just empowered.
You don't have anything to hide. Please give me all your passwords, and I will hold them for you.
Yeah, and you think all these passwords are secure? Well, I can tell you they pass through a dozen servers in open text before they ever get encrypted. You think that some programmer can't take them down? It's like, fuck. I mean, You don't see it so much now, but I once got in one system and went to the supervisor. I showed him everybody's password in the entire company, and it was just held basically in one place. It was just XORed. That's the only. It just XORed the bit stream. That was the only security. So you know, it's like, anyway, I hope we're shattering people's confidence in that the system actually works. The system is massively inefficient. It's just waterlogged and sclerotic and barely coping. And one of the reasons why it chugs along so merrily is because no one knows. No one exposes it. Everybody thinks that this is powerful and it works and it's indomitable. They say, no, it's the most corrupt, inefficient thing you could possibly imagine. I'm just staggered that it works. Every time I get on a plane, I'm not like everybody like, oh, this is fucking plane is late. I'm like, my fucking God, this thing got in the air. You know the chances of that? It's like, if you know the systems, the ACAS systems, everything that has to come, now you're starting to see it because you're seeing the JIT systems fail, you're seeing supply shocks and stuff. And now you can start to see that how the system ever worked for so long is just a miracle of people propping it up. It's millions and millions of people that are propping it up and making it fail safe. But you take those people, if people defect, and that's what's happening now, is people are just pissed off and they're giving up their jobs and stuff. But you see, if the average person, the goody two-shoes, little Ned Flanders that keep the system, if they defect, oh man, the system, your planes won't get off the ground.
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, is there any time in history when the Ned Flanderses have defected?
Yeah, all the time. In fact, that's pretty much the strategy for IB and XR and all of that is it's revolutionaries try to get the bourgeois to turn. That's the main thing. But I mean, essentially Gandhi got it. All revolutions, they turn. But I mean, yeah, the most fabulous example of it is Ceausescu. So essentially, just in one afternoon during a speech, some guy booed and the whole house came down. Booing to in the street to a Ceausescu speech was pretty much they'd take you away and you'd disappear. So to boo was a very, very very subversive thing to do and dangerous. But some guy did it, and the whole crowd suddenly was with him and started booing. And so it's Ceausescu didn't last a day after that.
From my understanding, that that's the public story of things like that, where in Egypt, the Mubarak was ushered away by the masses who revolted against him. And the truth is that's the military stepping aside, letting you do that, right? So
yes, damn it, I knew you, Ryan, I knew you were going to call me on that. I was hoping you wouldn't, but yeah, you're right. So the Ceausescu thing was all done behind the scenes, but still, I mean, I'm just pushing this story for propaganda effect. Yeah, underneath it all, yeah, it's all a big scam. But I didn't want you to call that out.
Sorry for popping the bubble.
The Ceausescu thing was a big scam. You see, what happened was in the Ceausescu thing. Since you called me on it, I'll explain it. The guys knew that Ceausescu was getting weak. So the second-tier apparatchiks, again, we were talking about this as captains' revolutions, is those guys are kind of frustrated inside it. So what happens in an officer class is, okay, you have all the rank and file, which is like our society. Then you have guys that make it, a few million, then they kind of become officers, and then they eat in the officer's mess. They don't mingle with you anymore. Surprisingly low bar. And then in the officer class, there's normally a divide, right around, the 30-year-olds, that kind of thing. So the captains, normally captains in the military by that stage. And what those guys are they know the system well, and they've fed up they're still young bloods, young Turks, and they're kind of fed up with the old guard. But they can't do anything about the old guard. And so, but they're looking for their chance all the time. And they're good administrators, they're more capable, they're smarter, they're more youthful, they're more cognizant and intelligent to go. And so they say in the case of Ceausescu, those guys, they know they can manage the machine without all these old guys. And so they look for their chance, and then they organize it so that they take down the old guys, and then they step in. And that's what happened in Egypt and in Romania. But what happened in Romania is then those guys became oligarchs, and they took over, and then it's just they just become the new landlords. But it's a palace coup, and this is a problem with the strategy for IB and stuff like that. Is unless you in with that class of guys, they will use you to do the revolution, their revolution, and then just like the Islamic Brotherhood and stuff in Egypt. They're waiting in the wings, and they have the levers of power. They just don't have authority to in the way they do, and that's how coups generally happen. So, but yeah, in terms of popular things, I can point you to like the White Lotus. So generally, a lot of these things are the guys from the bottom are farmers, and in our case, it would be white collar workers. So you'd get more and more people to just become lawless and start doing hacking and stuff. White collar workers have a tremendous opportunity for wrecking.
Yeah, I suppose the other examples in history, I was thinking about, there's been a lot of people referencing in relation to, the road to currency collapse. In the 1700s in France, the assignat and the run up to that, the Mississippi bubble, and then you had John Law, and he issued the assignat, and then I think they issued another one, and then people just didn't trust that, and then they issued Maritime Unitaire, I can't remember the name, it was a French name, another currency, and it lasted literally months. People were just like, nah, like they weren't buying it anymore. And then apparently a lot of scholars say that led directly to the French Revolution. I need to read a bit more about that, but there's a few guys on the gold bugs are talking a lot about that now. Alistair MacLeod keeps referencing it, and he's like, everything that's happening now in the financial world, all this crazy financialization and QE is a dead ringer for this Mississippi bubble where John Law.
Yeah, so I'm in that school. I'm in that school. I definitely agree with that led to the French Revolution, and I think they bang on that's exactly what it is. History is repeating itself now. But there's a few details in that which are important lessons and cautionary tales. So John Law in the Mississippi bubble was, just for people that don't know, John Law was a Scotsman who became Minister of Finance for Louis XIV, I guess. But he, in other words, did pretty much he's kind of the Alan Greenspan of the of his time, and the Mississippi bubble was a stock bubble that just like the stock exchange today, inflated massively, and John Law had to disappear in the night. But before John Law left office, he did something which was crucial for the history of the world, and that was he set up the first central bank. So what happened after that was that was replicated in Britain with the Bank of England, and then eventually in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Bank. But in essence, the whole system from John Law on has been run by those central bankers. And the very first thing that happened, what was more impactful than the French Revolution was it led to the 7 Years' War. So the 7 Years' War was the First World War. So Churchill called it the First World War, and it was definitely the first war that was global. And so now the reason for that, the war, if you look closely for the reasons, it's clearly the financiers. They made a huge packet out of it. And the reason why America was formed was because after the 7 Years' War, it was all done on debt by, basically bondage. Again, writing contract. So they, when the 7 Years' War was finished, it was, the reason why it's the financiers, because they financed both sides. They financed both France and Britain and Prussia and Russia. They financed all the sides. So, they would be treasonous if they were patriotic or had the national interests at heart. But what they did then after that is they said, okay, war's over. Now we come to collect all the fucking interest. And the colonies, George Washington and that crowd, George Washington was the richest landowner in the colonies. So they, knew that the colonies were going to be taxed to the bone to pay for the 7 Years' War. And so the reason for American independence was they said, like, fuck you, you're not going to extract tax out of us to pay for the 7 Years' War. That's the primary cause of independence, which is lost now. Historians never tell you about the finances, because that's the real meat and potatoes of what's going on, and they don't want you to know. Yeah. But anyway, unless somebody's got more to say about that, it's very important now, because we're about to go to war again. So if you follow that playbook, I think we should discuss the coming war.
Yeah, why not? Why not? Because I think we talked enough this morning about oh, there's a problem with my sound. Do you hear me?
Yeah, there's an echo.
There's an echo. I'll just do something. Sorry.
Oh, no, suddenly it's good. Suddenly it's good.
Okay.
Yeah, suddenly it's good.
No, what I mean is that we were talking this morning. What I was going to say is that we're talking so much about AI and this morning and intelligence. I think we should leave it for another day. And yeah, I would be very interested to hear about that, because it's always at the back. We were actually talking about it with Mike before the meeting, and yeah, because I have plenty to learn in that line.
Yeah, so in the light of all of that, I've been telling people now that, you must start preparing for war, because the way I see it is war's unavoidable. We're barreling headlong into war. And so, yeah, the reasons for it are financial. Well, I mean, it's economics, but I don't think that war can be avoided, just because of the system as it's been set up. So it's really a consequence of Bretton Woods. And so the financial system that was set up after World War II has set us up for World War III. And it was the American architects. We know them by name because they sat down with people like John Maynard Keynes and worked out Bretton Woods and the Bretton Woods system. And Maynard Keynes said, if you do this, you will herald disaster. And what he meant by disaster was essentially the system as it unfolded and World War III, which is where we're at now. So to simplify it vastly, and to explain to you why I think we're heading for wars, people will tell you all sorts of shit. Because you've got to understand what's really happening. You have to understand. And so a historian will tell you crap, and a military historian will tell you crap, and so an economist will tell you a little bit and stuff. But if you piece everything together, it works something like this. The quickest way to explain it is that what they set up at Bretton Woods was a Ponzi scheme. So America has been running a Ponzi scheme, and the way it worked was they agreed with Saudi Arabia. Everybody needs oil. So they had the Bitter Lake Agreement. Even in 1945, Roosevelt met King Saud, and they set up this system. What it said was, you can only sell oil for dollars. So the same with Iran, and they kind of got buy-in from French Mobil and BP, but anyway, they managed to have it that oil was sold in dollars. Now the whole point of that was that that enslaved the rest of the world in effect, because everybody needs oil, and it becomes a de facto currency. So if you're a country other than Saudi Arabia, you have to do some business with America, sell some goods to America, and so you can get dollars, and you need those dollars so you can go and buy, petrodollars, so you can go and buy oil on the open market, and everybody needs energy. The deal that they made with Saudi Arabia was then Saudi Arabia would only be allowed to buy. I mean, they could spend a bit on themselves buying fast cars and jets and hookers and stuff, but then what they had to do was buy assets in America. That was the deal. So they couldn't buy corporations or industry or start to eat up America that way. They particularly had to buy treasury. So in other words, government debt, bonds. And so now here you can see what's happening is everybody has to go and sell cheap shit to America to get dollars. That's the only way they can get oil. And then the Saudis have to go and buy treasuries, which in essence are a promissory note with a small interest rate, which the government sets. But they can set it any way they like, so because the Saudis have to buy them. So I hope you see what they've just done. If you see this little loop, what it means is they're getting goods from all over the world for free, right? They've set up this little system where, ultimately you need oil, then basically we funnel that through the Saudis then go and buy paper. And so in essence, they just doing goods for paper. So you see, now the reason they did this was in the old days, they used to do goods for gold. America had 3/4 of the world's gold at that stage. But you see, what everybody else had done was like the Spanish Empire. The Spanish Empire was ruined by gold and silver, particularly silver, because the Spanish galleons came back to Spain, and all the silver essentially went straight to China. Basically, with China, they had silks and exotic goods, the luxury items that flooded into Spain. The net effect was Spanish manufacturing, just like America now, got eaten up because labor was too expensive. Nobody would go down a mine. So in essence, there was no manufacturing base left in Spain. When the silver ran out, Spain had nothing. And so it was improper. And that's pretty much what America is today. So now, China. So in today's world now, you have to see that all these guys are running a Ponzi scheme. All of these fiat currencies a Ponzi scheme. It's a promise to pay back shit that you're never going to pay back. So what they're doing is all these players are sitting around a card table. Now you have to imagine Uncle Sam's got a bazooka. I mean, literally a fucking bazooka. You see, to run all of this, the reason why most countries can't run this scam is because they don't have a military. So it is really the power of the dollar comes from a barrel of a gun. Because if America actually defaulted or something like that, nobody can come and say to them like, okay, we're seizing Florida, thank you, but you owe it to us. That's how it normally works on equal countries. But if somebody has the biggest military known to man, then you can't do that. So most of the spending in America, government spending. Okay, the government spending is only three things. It's repayment on the national debt. That means the small interest payment that they give to the Saudis for recycling their petrodollars into treasuries. Then the other thing is Social Security and Medicare, which they hate and try to get rid of it. and then the military. That's all there is, just three things. That's all the government does. And the military is there to keep the whole system going. And so what it means is that you have to imagine, there's Pooh Bear, all the players sitting around this card table playing poker. America's losing, and deliberately, all the chips are now going over to China. So there's Pooh Bear. His chips are growing and growing and growing. But Uncle Sam has a bazooka on his shoulder pointed right at Pooh Bear. So you know exactly how this card game is going to go out. And in fact, Pooh Bear is playing this very, very badly. He doesn't have much choice, because really what he should be doing is impoverishing himself so he can slip out the door. But if you imagine you held hostage in this saloon in this Wild West scene, you know what's going to happen is the Pooh Bear is going to accumulate all the chips. He's got a gun next to him, and he has to reach for the gun at some stage. Otherwise, he can't get out the door with all the chips. And Uncle Sam is going to wait until he's got out of chips. Then he needs Pooh Bear to reach for his gun so that he can blow him away. And that's the situation we're in. So I hope that, yeah.
That's true to some degree. So in the conventional warfare arena, the U.S. has an enormous amount of firepower to bring to bear. However, that kind of conventional warfare is kind of, we're in a new era where that's, mainly for positioning and political maneuver. Whereas with, it's kind of like back in the day of piracy, where privateers would be hired by, the governments that didn't want to openly declare war, but they wanted to, the British wanted to smash the Spanish galleons, and so they would like hire out the privateers to go take care of them. A lot of the cyber warfare is, it's very difficult to trace or easy to make it look like it's coming from somewhere else, and so, how do you deploy an army against that? Like when you get attacked and you.
So it's not. They have to have a nuclear war. So here's a bit of background that one of the pieces people don't get, because you see the public and the non-governmental and non-military sector has talked themselves into this dangerous bit of bullshit about nuclear war. And so what it is in essence is, it was encouraged by the Soviets and agitprop and things like that, but the CND was badly infiltrated by communists. And they told the population, they terrified. You see, Russia during the Cold War, the first Cold War, they had a nuclear deficit. So America put all its chips on the table as nuclear, because they couldn't match the tank manufacturing and stuff that Russia had. So what Russia did in return was did things like the CND to scare the crap out of the population about nuclear. Now that it worked well, because the public now in America and Europe has this fixated idea that if nuclear war starts, it's binary. The first bomb that drops, well, it's game over. That's the end of the planet. They had this, 5 Easy Pieces movie. They literally had people, the serious academics, that wrote complete horseshit. Like, if nuclear war started, the planet would be split in 2 or into 5 pieces. And it's absolute hogwash. It's absolute hogwash. Now, why this is dangerous is it almost demands that we will have a nuclear war. And the reason is that America, okay, first of all, let me paint the picture, the true picture, and the picture that is in the heads of the military planners. So in their heads, they know the truth. And then the truth is that nuclear weapons are on a sliding scale. There's no such thing as, nuclear war breaks out, end of civilization. It's just a sliding scale that goes all the way from pepper spray to, for protesters on the street, all the way to hydrogen bombs. So it's a spectrum all the way, so that and there's the bogeyman of nuclear war is entirely in the public's head. It's not in the military's head. So, for example, they have conventional weapons that are much bigger than some of the nuclear weapons. Now that seems weird to you because you think of all these nuclear weapons, ICBMs. So no, I mean I worked with a guy who I told you had his job was to take a nuclear bomb the size of a football in a backpack into, when the Russians came streaming into Germany, he was stationed in Germany, and his job was to go into the middle of a tank battalion and, leave his bomb and try and make a getaway, or otherwise commit suicide if necessary. So you have, bombs this size. You have bombs the size of a shell. They actually have artillery weapons with, bombs. They have torpedoes and stuff. So if there's a war, say, over, in the South China Sea, one of the primary first uses of a nuclear weapon would be against fleets. They would try to take out the carriers because carriers are very well defended. You can try and just swamp them with nuclear weapons. So here's the reason why it's very dangerous that the public doesn't know this. Because since Vietnam, America has basically run off this idea of psyops, that psyops lead. So they know now that after Vietnam they were beaten by a superior psyops. So after Quino and stuff wrote these papers and set up this thing for mind war and things like that, then one of the key things that came out of that was shock and awe, and shock and awe was used in Iraq, and it worked. So you can bet that they're going to double down on it. But you see, look at the shock and awe value of a nuclear weapon. Is if you think in terms of this card table, where they need Pooh Bear to make a reach for his gun so they can blow him away. That's very easily accomplished. I mean, Taiwan could just declare independence, and China would attack, and that would give them an excuse to start a nuclear war. But in a lot of ways, America has to start a nuclear war, and it would win it. You see, the thing is that I think it would win it quite easily, in fact. And the reason is because most of the public, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but I think the same as in China, that if nuclear weapons went off, China in particular would think, oh, we fucked up, we're doomed. And they would win merely on the psychological aspect. So in terms of how a nuclear war unfolds is very much with the fleets and stuff. But I mean, you would expect they would put nuclear weapons on like Three Gorges Dam and stuff. China's very, very vulnerable to that kind of first strike. So
I think they are vulnerable to some degree, but the attitude is this long-standing attitude since Mao about we are fine to throw 1 billion people under the bus just to maintain our state. So we don't care if you bomb us, go for it. We'll bomb you worse. And it's the U.S. is a bunch of crybabies, and they will fold under that kind of pressure.
Yeah, I agree. But do you see how it almost mandates war, unavoidable war? Because America has all its power in nuclear, and it has to win decisively with a nuclear first strike. For Pooh Bear, the wealth is, again, it's kind of like Russia. It's basically it's manpower. It's like a few million people in the army now, and so 4 million, I think, or something is like in the army in China. And so they have to make it a long grinding war that America can't do. But but as long as America can take it nuclear quickly, it can end it quickly too.
I don't think that it ends the war, though. That's the thing. So in every simulation that I've heard of that the U.S. military has done, where they have any kind of ground war engagement or anything like that, in every scenario, the U.S. loses against China. And there's just not a way to do that. If it's a pure nuclear strike, it just I mean, you can hobble some industries and things like that, but China has a bunch of cities that are underground. They have a bunch of ways to make their infrastructure resilient to that kind of attack. And I think most of this is actually going to be more of a soft power battle. The hot war scenario, I think, is it's something I'm very concerned about, obviously, but it's also something that I think the U.S. knows. You'd have to get a dumb person to pull that trigger, right? And we have no shortage of those. So, but I think strategically,
no, just short-sighted person.
Yeah,
just short-sighted. So okay. So a couple of things. Those kind of things, like reports of that kind of stuff, is psyops. It's bullshit. So about U.S. loses everything like that. So one of the things they exclude is all their secret weapons. And so you can easily see that China would be wiped out to the last person, and they just do weather modification. So if they can time it so that it's the correct time for the monsoon or something like that, if they dump enough weapons in China, you can basically make a nuclear winter, change the monsoon. That they're thinking this way because in 2018 they drafted almost 2 million people. They got top security clearances for people in NOAA, the weather organization. So that's the way they're thinking, and so I think there are enough secret weapons in the arsenal that they would make it decisive. But in terms of it can't be a soft war, and the reason is they know and we know that we don't have the luxury of time. In essence, if you go back to the financial causes and the trade war and financial war, and all these things converging, the ecological crisis and the climate crisis, is they're all running a Ponzi scheme. And we're really in a resource war. So China has too many of the strategic materials and rare earth minerals. So they kind of have to, because if they run it too long, China will get parity or exceed America in nuclear capability, in which that means Uncle Sam can't use his bazooka anymore. Pooh Bear will have a bazooka at the other end of the table, which they cannot allow. And if they run it too long, then you'll run into climate change problems. So the climate change problems are coming on fast, and they're not sharing that with the public. But in terms of things like drought and crop failures and that, the crops are actually increasing in America, and they probably will, but for 1 or 2 more years. But the end of water is coming. And so we all know that we're heading for collapse. So if you see, liberals think it's all, they get stuck in this zone of politics. You see, that this is the problem, is it's so multifaceted that people, are not very good at telling the future. One reason is because their desires and fears get in the way of what they're actually looking at, so their objectivity. So they lose objectivity because they don't want something to happen. They lose objectivity because this is their knowledge base. They have a knowledge base, say, I've done economics for so, and I can tell you that blah, 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 and stuff. And then they're missing, doesn't take into account climate change. Then climate change people and stuff can tell you all of that. But very few people see it the way a planner in the Pentagon sees it. And you're seeing the limits to growth. You're seeing the end of these resources, particularly things like fresh water. You see the need to actually do geoengineering. And you can easily see them rapidly coming towards something which hasn't been hit since 1965. As long as I've been alive, it hasn't been hidden. That the way they see the final Armageddon And literally, a lot of these guys are Mormons and stuff, and do see this as Armageddon. Don't make a mistake about this. There's a lot more fucked up as business as usual, and you know, the liberal narrative of what people would do and which would be crazy and mutually assured destruction. That's all horseshit. A lot of these guys are actually fundamentalist Christians, and they see this as Armageddon. So don't discount crazy. So but anyway, if you put all of these together in a bag, you can easily see that they do, you know, geoengineering with nuclear weapons. You cool down the climate very easily. You run a few models. Is you wipe out China's crops, you make famine, you nuke them into, you know, into submission. You make a flood in the Yalu River. You see, think about. You see, it's very dangerous to get into this mindset of, oh, they would never do that because, you know, they couldn't guarantee that nuclear, you know, U.S. cities wouldn't be struck. Now, that's not the way these guys think. That's the way liberals think, and people on TV think, and talking heads think. The way it really works is they would be prepared to lose American cities. There may be all 50 of them. You see, because where they're looking in terms of the end of growth, where this all winds up, is you really want to wind up with a planet of about 500 million people. So you have to look at it in a broad scale and see it in terms of their doomsday kind of thing, that we're heading to kind of the end times. And so I can't see that you can avoid. There are too many things. There are too many problems it solves going down that route.
I agree. I think you've definitely, like, that analysis is definitely plausible. I think it's, but my question is, where does Russia and North Korea and countries like that, because as much as they may have like their wishes to plan this, okay, yeah, they're probably mad and crazy, as you're saying. Are you saying that they would have done some backroom deal with Putin, or, well, I mean, they would be on the phones, wouldn't they, if they're going to just about to launch something? But what stops it escalating, and then we've just got nothing left because they go and launch all their nukes, and you end up in some complex spiral of, well, like they projected back when the Rand Corporation, all these people were figuring it out back in the 70s, how it would escalate. I mean, you can't just discount Russia and all these other countries that have nukes, can you?
Yeah, so it's a complicated world, but the important thing that I want to try and convey to you, if nothing else, is don't get into this liberal idea, which is, you know, it's the progressive millenarian thing, where you think, oh, it all spirals into chaos and then the end. No, they don't do that. Military planners don't go, and then, you know, they never finish a report or analysis or do modeling that says, and then it all goes to shit. It's like, I'm telling you, military reports do not end that way. They go in details, exactly what is left at the end of it. And I'm telling you, in a lot of, you see, if you look at something like the Rockefeller Foundation and the Council on Foreign Relations and their kind of projections of these scenarios, is particularly the one that stands out for me is the Ford Foundation, or no, Rockefeller Institute, the one where they had all these different 5 different scenarios. We're in the lockstep one. Now, an average liberal would say that this is a disaster, because it's you know, there's a lot of unrest on the streets, there are pandemics, there are wars, and so it's saying, like, why are we on that trajectory? And well, there's a key line in it that says, this one, the government keeps control. The other nice one, which was, you have, you know, universal government and UBIs and rainbows and unicorns, and we, you know, work together to bring together, is the centralized planning and governments would have to disappear. And so you can see why that we've gone down the lockstep one. But anyway, I just want to say that at the end, we go into, you know, as civilians and stuff, we go into, and then, well, the world falls apart and we've lost liberal democracy. Oh, then, so obviously we'd never go there. No, you're a liberal Democrat. The guys that are doing these plannings are not liberal Democrats, I'll tell you that. And a lot of them, like Pompeo and stuff, they have copies of Mein Kampf secretly under their pillows, right? So okay, if you're going to guess where all this goes down is kind of all of the above. You wouldn't ever get an insight. But the way the Cold War is set up is that it's North Korea, Pakistan, China, Iran, Russia on one side. But I would guess that Putin's playing everybody off against everybody else, and I wouldn't be surprised if they'd give him a phone call and warn him that I think he would know anyway, because it's probably the thing that's liable to do it is a invasion of Taiwan. Then they would say, look, we're going to nuke them, and Russia would stand down saying, okay, let America and China fight it out, and we'll be supreme at the end of it. I'm pretty sure that's what Putin thinks. But it's a weak alliance. The weak alliance on that side.
I believe Putin has recently backed China for Taiwan. He has actually said that Taiwan is.
No, they are aligned. They are aligned. It's just an alliance of convenience. That's the thing. China and Russia have been to war in the 1960s. We're talking tank war, so they're not great lovers of each other, right? So they're not compadres in that way. They have a marriage of convenience, right? So how deep does it go? I mean, that Putin's out for Putin, right?
Okay, and then of course we have the problem of North Korea, which, I mean, Trump went some way to start talking to, which was interesting. That was actually one of the interesting things that Trump did. And I don't know, it was just, obviously it's all facade, but that was something that no other president had done, wasn't it? To go and talk to little Kim. Yeah. But North Korea is a bit of a messy one. I mean, what would they do there? Because I mean, North Korea are kind of, there's a sort of a partnership between North Korea and China, isn't there? I mean, China puts North Korea in its place every now and again, doesn't it?
But China needs North Korea to not collapse, because then it has a major migration crisis of unskilled people just flooding everywhere. That it couldn't sustain. So it wants North Korea to stay isolated and keep its problems inside its borders. An interesting story about North Korea that almost no American knows is Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea. He traced his great grandfather back to, or maybe it's just his grandfather, to an event that we never learned in school, which is similar to how Commodore Matthew Perry took the gunboats to Japan and said, "Open up for unequal trade, or we'll come back and burn all your cities in 1 year." We did the same thing with Korea. We went up the river with our gunboats and said, "Hey, we want all your stuff. This is a shakedown." And there was the General Sherman incident. So the gunboat was called the General Sherman, and it got lodged on a sandbar. And these Korean villagers streamed in and burned it down. And the leader of that pack of villagers was, Kim Il-sung traced, he said that was his grandfather. It's so important to them in their mythology to be, in opposition to the colonial powers, that was really a part of his founding narrative of his cult of personality.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know.
The U.S. were the evil aggressors in many times over.
Yeah, but just one more thing that I was thinking of here is getting into simple scenarios about who would win a nuclear war and stuff. Is like that and how much bullshit there is in that. Is one of the big, I would say one of the crucial factors, and one of the things timing when war will come is the cyber war that's been going on, and particularly the chip war. So that the chips are compromised. You clearly see that each their nuclear stockpiles are compromised in terms of they're hacked.
Yeah.
And how badly they're hacked is extraordinary. So, for example, like if you're talking about North Korea, a missile went into Pyongyang. One of their test missiles went into Pyongyang and into the suburbs and killed a few people. Well, that's almost definitely hacked. That's almost definitely hacked by US and Israel. And what they normally do in that kind of hack is turn the missiles against, back on its target. So a lot of these reverse engineer technologies and things that China's got in terms of torpedoes and missiles and stuff, they will turn back on a submarine. So if a lot of this technology that uses GPS and location finding, if it determines that it's like suddenly going at 3 times the speed of sound or something, it will instantly turn itself back to its target. And so they're struggling to get clean chipsets, but the chip shortage has nothing to do with COVID. Don't believe that. The chip shortage started before COVID, and as far as I can tell, they're trying to get clean chips. Now, the reason I think for that is so that they can go to war. But as soon as they've got a clean chipset, in other words, in about 2 years, you can expect war. Because everything's kind of converging on that.
Yeah, in China.
But you see, in their minds, that you see a conventional approach. It might, how many nuclear missiles does China have? How many does America have? And it's like, no, it's nothing to do with that. It has to do with how much the guys in the Pentagon think that they have in the cyber war, they can turn the missiles back on China, and how many they're going to actually take and intercept. And there's so many weapons that you don't know about, like particle beam weapons and stuff like that. A lot of the stuff that's done in SLAC and the Large Hadron Collider, you think all that civilian research and all that finding the Higgs boson, and it's like all that shit's dual use. I'll bet you anything that the magnets and all that technology for boosting hadrons and focusing the beams and stuff is used in somewhere you'll find it deployed on a 747, and it's all dependent on basically taking out ICBMs but all those things are factored into massive calculations that we're not privy to. And so I would think that if you look at the posture of America, is that they have supremacy and they're losing it, and they have to go to war, and it has to be a nuclear war before they lose supremacy. So Puba is in a hopeless situation. He's accumulating all the chips on the table. He's walking down a barrel of a gun, and he's stuck. He can't get rid of his chips because otherwise, it'll make China economically unstable if they stop growing economically. He can't get to nuclear supremacy or military supremacy without evoking a Thucydidean trap. So he's absolutely boxed in. I can't see how we can escape war. And America has to do it, because otherwise, if you look at the future, if you run the future where you see one of the things happening, if you go to the financial landscape, is what China's forcing is a de-dollarization. China, in effect, is doing exactly what Saddam was doing, and many others, including people like Gaddafi. But China is trying to de-dollarize. Now, de-dollarization is it. De-dollarization is a nuking, right there. Mm-hmm. And China's kind of doing it, so they can't win.
Yeah, that's part of the proxy war with Russia, with Assad and stuff. Is all about that pipeline that Russia was building through there. And to regarding the GPS. GPS in China is intentionally broken. So your phones report the wrong location all the time, like randomly. So you can use GPS, but it's wrong within a
a certain radius often, just because it's a national security thing.
It's the same in America. It's same with GLONASS, everything. So but China has, everybody is putting up their own positioning satellites. So they have their own network. The problem is are those networks compromised? So in other words, when the war starts, is how bad is the error for military equipment? I mean, it gets switched off for civilian, right? By the way, there's a little pointer for you if you're a prepper. Is the GPS gets switched off day one, and so it happened in the Gulf War. It happened in the first Gulf War. One of the first things that happened was they switched the GPS system off. And so that'll happen again, and that's the reason why they invented GLONASS and why the Chinese system is rolling out for global positioning. But you see, they don't know that the chipsets and the software that they're using isn't compromised, so that it'll start relocating all the American cities onto Chinese cities to thwart missiles and stuff. It's that bad.
That's what they're actively trying to do, is get locally sourced chips for everything, and the U.S. is trying to do that as well, struggling somewhat, but both sides have each other's tech and each other's supply chain, and it's kind of a Roman generals thing of like, hey, I'm the more charismatic general, all your troops are now mine, now what are you gonna do? Like that kind of thing.
All your base are ours.
Exactly.
But yeah, in terms of I was just one of the things you said in terms of the chipsets. Lost the thread.
Supply chain.
Oh yeah, the supply chain. Yeah, so one of the primary chip producers is Taiwan. So it means that in essence there is a calculation for China to make, and that is how much semiconductors is America reliant on from China and Korea and the Philippines, and so they could try and rush those if they think it's going to be a long war, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just for the sake of the audience, I want people to know that every chip that you have bought in the last 15 years has been compromised. There are smaller chips, like full-on computers inside each CPU that monitor and can remotely view what's on your screen and can take over. This is called the Intel Management Engine, and AMD has something similar. There are companies like Purism that are trying to disable it, but if you disable it, then your computer hard reboots every 30 seconds. So it's a very difficult thing to get around. But just know that with any kind of computer that you're using, that they're all you cannot buy a non-compromised computer commercially. They've all been compromised for decades. So don't think that you're safe on your own hardware and think that you own your computer. You don't. You're merely renting it from.
And it's all sorts of levels. I mean, it's from the hardware. They have rogue chips in the chipset. So they have in the microcode. They have even in open source software. They have guys slipping in lines of code. And so in the Linux kernel, there's fucking backdoors and shit. It's like ridiculous.
Yeah, there's also that Turing Award lecture, Reflections on Trusting Trust, I think, which is a very interesting take, where even if you have perfectly legitimate source code, you'd need a compiler to compile it, and
you can hide, you can put the vulnerability in the compiler. So when you see a certain kind of source code, it like puts a little backdoor in. But then you can hide that. You can say, well, I have the source code for my compiler, and then you just hide it a layer deeper. And eventually you can go so deep that no one can ever tell, like unless you go bit by bit. And even then,
I wouldn't say, yeah.
Yeah.
Even then, so yeah, if validation software and that doesn't work, but yeah, just a bit of history from my personal history. I worked for the biggest computer company, and one of the things I did was maintain this back level software that it was a commercial software, but it was used by the U.S. military for various things, which I won't mention, but very topical on this subject. And it was many years out of date. So it was really 20 years out of date, and the US military paid this big company to keep this software going because it was old, precisely because it was old. They don't like new technology because it can be compromised. But it was, that software was all written in assembler code. So to get around the compiler program and problems. Even now, the nuclear launch things in those nuclear launch facilities, they are out of the 70s, and they deliberately so because there was less espionage. Mm-hmm. And so they dare not upgrade those things because they're so likely to be compromised.
Right.
It's a weird world.
Yeah, it's in Battlestar Galactica when they were fighting the Cylons or whatever. They made sure that their spaceships had no technology on them, so that they couldn't be hacked. Analog everything.
But this is, yeah, but hang on. This is what Bin Laden and these this is standard fare. So they found that Bin Laden and all these guys would exchange handwritten messages, and
yeah,
that's the way in general people have to operate. So here, this is an important point, and I'd like to emphasize it, is when people see all this e-tyranny coming down the tendency is to say, oh no, we're boxed in, oh well no, we're defeated, how can this is coming from every angle for every aspect of our lives, and how could we ever really rebel against this or even resist? So here's the thing. The way to see all this technology is it's kind of like nature's way of telling you ought not to be doing this. So in other words, it's kind of like a memo from the universe saying, thou shalt not do this. It's not a good thing to be doing. And so so for example, if we tell you all this stuff about, say, how the airline industry and stuff is compromised, or they say, well, you can't fly unless you have, a apartheid green pass and stuff like that, is saying like, and then you go, oh, well, we won't be able to go into the supermarket, we won't be able to fly, and say, yes, that's correct. It is time to let go of those things. So you take those as a gentle nudge to stop using them. See, these are nudging everybody, but they're nudging everybody on those fucking systems. They're nudging you on Facebook, and they're doing propaganda in the media and stuff. So as you hear that now you can no longer go and do such and such because of draconian this and that, and you say, well, wave it goodbye. You say, but I can't go to a cinema. And say, yeah, wave cinemas goodbye. It's time. It's time, dudes. Wave them goodbye. It's you let these things go. But it's fine being fighting from the inside, but just don't get into this attitude that we're being boxed in and we're surrounded and defeated. Say no. We're moving slowly away, backing towards the door. Because so like say, so now if you have a prepper mindset and you think, I'm going to survive this Cold War II hot war, well, who's going to survive? Well, for the people that are furthest away from infrastructure, and so the further you are away from a nuclear power station, particularly a railway line. You don't want to be near a railway line. Right? So if there was a nuclear attack on America, America would do pretty fucking well. What it's likely to be is HAEMP, so a high altitude EMP weapon. That's inside the atmosphere, in the upper atmosphere, especially intercepted missiles coming in, that make a huge EMP wave. It would take out all the internet. It would take out the grid. But a lot of things are hardened in the military. It's very easy to harden things, by the way, but it hasn't been done. They've neglected it terribly. One of the things that I don't think a lot of people know is that the internet backbone is around railways. So when the internet came and they digitized all the analog system from the 50s onwards, they laid, eventually about the 80s, they were laying fiber optics. So everything's fiber. So the backbone of the internet is all high-speed fiber. So they laid all these bundles down the train tracks because they didn't have to get eminent domain or dig up shit. The railroads already followed all the routes that you would want to connect because they came from the era of the railroads. So like, for example, Sprint is one of the big carriers in the internet. And I don't think a lot of Americans know that Sprint stands for, Sprint, by the way, if you're not American, is like, I don't know what a big carrier is, it's like BT or something like in the UK. But a lot of people in America, I think, don't know that Sprint is an acronym. It actually stands for Southern Pacific Railroad Internet. And people just assume it's a name. But it goes down the Southern Pacific Railroad because those were originally the routes. So for, if you kind of monkey wrench inclined or EMP inclined, or you're the prepper that wants to make sure you don't get nuked, is be far away from railway line. So all of these things are, if you think of who survives, it's basically anybody that's far away from any technical stuff. So if you're like in Ireland or and you're not near any strategic infrastructure, you're in good shape. You see the way a lot of people talk. You get economists and they're talking about the future, and they will say, well, Europe is a dead zone or something like that. It's because, but you want to be in an economically dead zone. Europe is a great place to be, according to my analysis, and the reason is it's rapidly becoming a marsh zone. So during the Cold War, it was Germany was the sacrifice zone. So they were going to sacrifice Germany for capitalism. The Germans were happy about that, but that's no longer the case. It's not. They're no longer big, tank battalions that are going to roll in from Putin's Russia across Europe. So Europe is no longer the key battleground. In fact, Europe is sidelined. And so European countries, the more unaligned they are, the more neutral, the more they're marsh regions, the better. So a lot of them in Europe are going to go towards the right. Everybody's going towards the right. It's not that bad. I mean, you don't want to live in under the totalitarian left or right. But out of my personal preferences, I'm more scared of the totalitarian left. But in terms of thinking, everything's going fash and stuff, it's like, no. In some ways, you might be more protected with a right-wing government in Europe. It's not the end of the world. Especially if you're an anarchist and it's you Antifa and it's going over to the right, and it's like, look, the state is the state, and so both of them are horrendous, left and right. But don't get trapped in one or the other and think that the right is so much worse than the left. No, it's not that way. In fact, there might be some protection in being a little bit right-wing in terms of a hot war and even the Cold War.
If China, so to say, so say if America launches this, they somehow aggravate China to, and they get the signal that they can, right, that's it, we're ready, we're going to launch this attack at China. Isn't China then just going to have all of their pre-programmed missiles just firing off at all of America's allies, and we're just going to end up with, no more planet, like Armageddon, like well, kind of what I was saying before, but it's not like that. You don't see that they've already got, but they just don't have the resources, the missiles, or it's just going to be they're just priming just for America.
Yeah, they both sides are trying to win it. They're trying to win the war, so they don't do a scattergun approach and stuff. You see, it's the balance of nuclear power is very secret and clandestine, and it's based on particularly how many warheads you can get through the defenses. So that's why all these new high-speed. So China's just basically circumnavigated the world with this high-speed missile, which apparently America wasn't ready for. But I think that's in the news today. And so what that does is it destabilizes the nuclear deterrent, because it means that they have to recalibrate what the risk is now. They have to figure out how many of these things do you do, how many of them are going to get through in the war game. And so that takes a lot of planning. And so, it basically makes a big ripple in the Pentagon and stuff like that. But you see, it's very, very foolish to do these things, because if you think of Pooh Bear at the card table, he's going to do one of these things, and it's going to be very bad news for him, because he's going to say, okay, tips the balance. We're in deep trouble now. And they say, okay, that's it. This is it. Launch. That's how it's going to be. So they both, just at the edge of the precipice. They're really doing brinkmanship. And as far as I can see, China's losing hands down. But you see what America's liable to do. I think America wants a nuclear war. I'm pretty well convinced of it. So and they want the shotgun war and all of that. So what they're liable to do is to trick China into it, to lure China to basically take a weak posture. So you see what I mean? Is they fake a weakness to provoke an attack.
Yeah, the U.S. has been trying that for a long time, and China's too smart to fall for it.
Yeah, but you see, it's so finely balanced. You see, like Pooh Bear's career is based on a lot of things. One of them's Taiwan, and so he can get into a situation where he thinks he would be biased towards deluding himself, if you see what I mean. So in other words, he was going against his better judgment. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's too shrewd for to do that before he can guarantee a victory. But
I think so too. I think so too. But like, if the kind of things I imagine is like, if like Joe Biden hasn't, I mean, I would be amazed if he makes it through his term. So it's Kamala Harris and stuff as President Harris. I think would be a very weak president, and she's very liable to overcompensate, because I think she has a huge imposter syndrome. It's not really imposter syndrome. She's an imposter, so she's got it right. Yeah, but anyway, I just wanted to paint the picture of that's all these things that might look like weakness. If Joe Biden pops his clogs, if Taiwan declares independence, if the stock market tanks, I mean, all the way down to if China drains the Three Gorges Dam, if they let the water level go, that's how close it is. That would trigger war.
Yeah, there are a lot of like interesting maneuvers that they've been doing recently. Like a lot of things right after another. Kind of relocating the center of the financials to the mainland, moving things out of Hong Kong, changing the education system so that you can't have all education has to be government controlled. These are all happening within a month or two of now, or they've already happened. I know a lot of people.
So what's all the deal?
Go ahead.
What's all the deal about them? Going anti-LGBTQ and going kind of anti-woke and stuff. What's all that about?
I think it's the ultimately when you have a state, the sexual control is one of the key factors. So whether you're religious or you have, it's in Mao did that as well. He like desexualized people so that you can control people, because once you take away the food, you take away the sex, you make it so that people are essentially born criminals, and they have to come through you to get basic human needs. So I think that's it's different than it is in Russia. So in Russia, it's placating the Orthodox Church and the right in Russia. There is no such religious influence in China. It's ultimately same principle. Why would Islam make it so that it's not Vegas all the time? It's because it gives you control. So if to be a Chinese man and to have a chance of getting married, you need to be a slave for a long period of time to be able to accumulate a house, which could be $1 million in some of the major cities, for a basic house. You need a car. You need to have a good career and stable prospects before you're even considered, because there's too many men due to the one-child policy and the infanticide compared to the women. So the women have the pick of the litter, and it's pretty much all of society is about sexual control and sexual delayed gratification. So if you want to have that sex, you have to be a slave for 20 years in order to have offspring and to experience that. And very often the dating culture here is, once you start dating, like Chinese to Chinese, once you start dating, there's an expectation of, okay, now we've been on 2 dates, let's start talking about marriage, right? Let's, how is this going to work? And in fact, it gets to the point where there are, there's just so much family pressure, and it's the script that you have to follow as a citizen is much stricter, much tighter enforcement by the family than is in Western cultures. So and this is part of Confucianism and this kind of thing, is that Chinese culture is much more stable over time because it's not each generation gets its wildly new way of doing things. It's like a lot of the decision making happens a generation or two before the current generation. So often, there were some arranged marriages, but it's not like that quite anymore. But it's more like there's pressure and matchmaking done where there are these markets where parents will go, shop around for their children to get married, like find a spouse for them and this kind of thing. And if you do not get married by 30 and you're a woman, there's a lot of pressure on you because you're considered like a left behind woman, like a piece of trash, right? That is unwanted because there's this, fetishization around youth and the ability to have children and the
just this expectation of once you're old, you're not a desirable person anymore, and that's the other form of the cultural control. So there's and all of this leads to essentially very high-end effective control over people to do lots of labor for the companies and for the state. So another thing that happened recently is the government just banned children from being able to play more than I think 2 hours of video games a week. So that's a new law. Various things like this. Yeah, and I have to say that the level of intelligence, or at least education, it's far higher. There are much more international thinkers, much more open-minded people, educated people in China than I've seen in the West, because of this, these strictures. That it pushes people to be smarter, and there's a culture of cultural exchange where it is expected, if you are of a certain class, that you will study abroad, and you'll see the world, and you'll bring that cultural nuance back. And so there's a lot of just incredible entrepreneurial culture, rather than having like an employee mindset as much, which is it's a strange thing, because there's like a lot of pressure to have something stable. So that, even some of the entrepreneurs may be a little less in terms of the risk taking, but there's it's considered normal for, if you need money, you just start a business. But you do a business that's less risky than other people. So you would go, like if someone has a successful hot pot restaurant, you'd go open up a successful hot pot restaurant next to them, right? Like it's, and this is going to actually some of the Darwin was wrong videos. Like this is a phenomenon in China that makes no sense if you look at typical competition mindset, right? Because people don't cluster next to their competitors.
Oh, clustering, yeah, the clustering
yeah.
thing, yeah.
Yeah, but that bears out in Chinese economics.
Do you hear much about the Uyghurs, or do they hide that in the news?
Well, I don't follow any of the state media here, so I don't know if that's talked about. But I think a lot of that is Western propaganda. There's certainly that's being done, but it's being done, just like you don't hear about the black sites in Turkmenistan for the U.S. in the U.S., right? Like you don't get that doesn't get talked about. So it's various countries airing each other's dirty laundry and then using it to say, look at these demons on the other side. But they're all demons. They're all states.
Yeah, I just saw this headline now that the Taliban are taking Uyghur refugees and repatriating them back to China to the peril.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because China actually is way smarter in terms of dealing with terrorism. So if there's a Muslim like jihadi bombing in a city, you never hear about it. It doesn't get publicized. It doesn't create bunch of security theater around it and all this stuff. It goes ignored, which is exactly the way you disincentivize terrorism, right? In the way the US.
What do you mean, like the fire in Kent? You mean the fire in the power connection to France in Kent? You mean like that?
I actually
don't really hear about it.
I didn't hear about that, so.
See, it works.
It works, yeah.
But actually, nobody's talking about this thing. I mean, it's just tiny. Once a week, I read a little thing about that they're repairing, and it's going to take 2 years. There's been nothing about the fire, nothing how it started. And that place, I know that place near the tunnel, and there's enormous surveillance. There's fences everywhere. It's a big place where there's a lot of traffic and a lot of things, a lot of people passing there. So there's extremely, extremely sophisticated surveillance. So, I mean, you know, there's nothing. They don't even say it's an accident, really. It's not even
Cyber attack.
Well, it's a fire.
Cyber attack. Yeah, no, a fire. No, that is
Ryan,
the kind of things you do. You see, all these things are SCADA systems.
It's a cable that runs under the channel that was bringing the power from France to England, and there was a fire, so the cable was stopped, and the supply of electricity to England is interrupted from France, which is an enormous percentage of their cheap energy that's coming from nuclear energy. So, and they're going to be 2 years without that. Basically, that's the story.
Basically, they have to fire up all the coal-fired power stations, and they've blown all the Paris targets. But Sophie, a fire is a very likely result of a cyber attack. So all these systems are SCADA systems, and they all control the machinery. So if they try to get things like, you know, shut down cooling things and ramp up something that needs cooling, you know, all that kind of thing. And then if they get it right, there'll be a catastrophic fire and stuff. So don't assume a fire is some guy in a hoodie, you know, climbing over a fence to monkey wrench it. It's more likely to be, you know, cyber.
Yeah, I thought the timing on that was just far too good. Like, clearly, yeah, and I completely agree.
It has all the smell. It has all the smell of a cyber attack. When stuff like that happens, I feel very much like I'm in South Africa or the Soviet Union or stuff, because you see stuff that's so obviously they're not telling you the full story, and then you're forced to like guess and thinking, you know, and you get little drips that give you hints about but that's what it's like living. This is the world we're going to be living in more and more and more. It's kind of 1984, where you will get these little hints, and you think, hang on a minute. That's a huge fucking story. Anyway, moving on. And then the story gets kind of suppressed. It doesn't make any sense. You got to piece it all together yourself. But it is possible. You got to keep focusing on stuff like that. But I maybe I'm dreaming, but I'm seeing this all over the place, right?
Yeah, in relation to that one, sorry, we've digressed from this China talk, but yeah, who would you think why would they do that? I mean, obviously it suits the sort of the energy crisis agenda, like all of this, you know. I mean, UK is screwed. Like the energy policy is just a disaster. You know, we're heavily reliant on gas, and they built loads of windmills, and we haven't had any wind, so. Yeah, actually, funnily enough, there was a BBC documentary called Blackout from 2004, and I couldn't believe how well it actually laid out. It was almost down, like they had this scenario, there was a black swan, it took out something in Eastern Europe, gas pipeline, and in the documentary they were saying we were, at this time, hypothetically, it was like in 2010, the UK is reliant on like 60 or 70% of their fossil fuel makeup was gas in the documentary. And then there's a problem with like the renewables. And of course there's a black swan, and then we have all these blackouts. And it was from years ago. It was it was almost the parallels were quite striking. But I just wonder who would be bad actor.
Would you post that, Tom? It would be interesting if you have the link to that document.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's quite an old documentary, but yeah, it's on YouTube. I think it's just called Blackout.
So in terms of the cyber war landscape, it's a complete mess. You kind of have to imagine Syria or something, but going on in the background in the cyber war. So if you have any server, it's probably any server that is addressable on the web as a name server. It probably gets hit once every 3 seconds, would be a malicious attack. There are a lot of things like crawlers and stuff, so you can't really tell who's accessing it, but you can see these things being probed. Any server, your machine now would be probed all the time. And so who's doing it is a zoo. The state actors. Putin has this amnesty for hackers in the understanding that they don't attack him. So there's a lot of organized crime networks and the ransomware. Hidden within those guys are a lot of state actors. But the vast majority of the shit going on is America and Israel, going outwards. But everything from Nigerian scammers to anonymous guys, and more and more now, I think the eco terrorists, but not enough of those. But there's so many parties that are getting in on this that it's it's starting to look like a ghetto on the internet.
Yeah, and something we should say also is just how asymmetrical it is between defense and offense. So offense is almost always, I would say 10 times easier than defense. Like or even more than that, because with defense you have to defend against every possible threat. But if you slip up once, you're hosed. So all of the skew is on the offensive side. Like all you have to do is succeed once and you got it. But they have to never fail on the defensive side, and that's just a much taller order.
Yeah, a lot of the machines. So it's happening silently. So a lot of these machines are bots for people, for cyber attacks and stuff. So they're sold in bulk on the web. When people break into a machine, they don't automatically wrap it up in ransomware and charge you with Bitcoin. What's more likely is they would sell all your details, they'd scrape all the machine and stuff, and once they've got rid of that, they'll sell the access on the dark web. And then what somebody will do is put a bot on your machine, and you can see it going out, then looking for other machines. So it looks very much like a virus. It looks very much like a pandemic. In terms of cybersecurity, it's remarkable how analogous it is to virology and pandemics, and how viruses propagate. I mean, it's they call it computer viruses, and people think it's an analogy, but it's very, very, very apropos. And so yeah, it's a reflection of a lot of what's going on in the surface in terms of the financial war, trade war, hot war. But all of them are heating up. You see, all of them are heating up. If you look at the trends of the direction, like the UK just made a cyber, I can't remember, cyber whatever they called it. But anyway, it's a cyber offensive arm. It's like Talpiot or Unit 8200 in Israel and stuff. But where you see more and more of these people are making these countries that were kind of, backwaters, like Sweden or something. They starting to do cyber attack or just cyber warfare departments. And those are going to grow and grow and grow. And those guys immediately start attacking. So, I think this whole system is going to come down because just the elephants are fighting each other.
I think it is possible that any technology that relies on computing is going to become too much of a liability to maintain. If you get AI to the point where it can offensively attack any surfaces that you want, then no matter what kind of defensive techniques you use, it will have been trained against a lot of those, and so it just becomes like Battlestar Galactica, where you just stop using tech because it's all infected.
Yeah, I kind of think of it like a ghetto. So it's it's kind of like a neighborhood that's going to pieces. So if you think of the dream of the the tech heads back in Silicon Valley in the 80s. And now it's kind of the seedy ghetto that's kind of like, Biff's town, Biffville, or whatever that was in Back to the Future. And so, you imagine that these companies that are, get all their systems locked up with ransomware, and then they're paying out the ransoms. And then it's like, can you imagine that gets to be so that you get held up like that, every 6 months? You're just packing the company, it's like, and that's where we're getting to. It's eventually people leave town.
I honestly can't wait. I can't wait for the day that, like, I don't know, UK government website goes down. I shouldn't say that, but I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, all these systems thing. Like, I would love the glee of seeing everybody going, oh God, like, look what's happening. Like, the world's falling apart. We can't use our phones. Oh no. Like, yes.
The bliss. Well, you see, this is how the system comes down, is when the average person starts thinking that, we ain't got long to go. Yeah, maybe we should end it on that note. But that is the takeaway lesson from all of this, is that tell your friends, tell everybody you know, first let them lose faith in the system, then let them eventually, they come over to our side and we'll go through the looking glass, and then they'd like, they stop thinking of all these headlines in the Guardian that go something like, oh, the world's coming to an end, such and such was ransomware, so this is like, oh, it's terrible. It's like, no, it's glorious. And then more people that think that way, the faster we can get over all this shit. But anyway, just one final word on but the same applies. If business as usual is so dangerous that even if we had a nuclear war, it would be better. So this, even if you heard that there was, nuclear weapons being used in the South China Sea, you should celebrate, because the current trajectory we're on is so dangerous that anything, even nuclear war, would be better than business as usual. So I just want to leave that thought with you. Yeah. Okay, unless does anybody else want to say anything? They got something burning to say? Oh, okay, kind of tiring. Well, let's just pause and do our usual, and just it's kind of stressful. Can't help talking about these subjects. They're kind of weighty, and they get your cortisol going and get you a little bit worried. And it's important to realize that even if the bombs start dropping, they're not dropping now. So enjoy it. Just cherish every minute that you have now, where it's calm, peaceful, and all of this is just a distant dream. Om Paramatma Namah. Good. Interesting one.
Thank you
Yeah.
for all that information, Ryan, and you and everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Al.
Bye, everyone. Have a good week.
Have a good one.
Bye now.